Growing up, you hear so many idealistic things, but that's something that the world seems to strip from folk as they grow up. Or maybe just replaces with ideals that are mean-spirited and self-serving. There's something that growing up does to you socially. When you're a kid, you can see it from a distance. It's a big part of what makes the thought of growing up so despicable. The veneer many adults seem to adopt, especially from the perspective of a child, is a lack of empathy. An inherent coldness to the plight of others, or at least an acceptance that things can or will never change. An acceptance of which we already know to be, a lack of a better word, evil? It's kind of encapsulated by the sentiment, life isn't fair, just deal with it. Which I think is a flesh-based equivalent of get good? Now, you might be saying, well, life isn't fair, and you probably can list a bunch of reasons why that's the case. Income and housing inequality, climate change, systematic racism, transphobia, and so much more. Well, capitalism aggravates or creates the conditions necessary for all those rampant injustices, and that's by far not a hot take. But as a kid, there was a point that you weren't allowed to get close enough to the coal mine to see the screaming canary. It's a general conceit of first world society that children should be able to ignore the plight of the world for as long as possible. Obviously, the degree to this depends on how marginalized that kid is, but youth is symbolic for many as innocence and potential. And knowing about poverty, war, and class struggle is seen as something to be cheated out slowly over time, so as not to panic. Kind of like turning up the water to cook a lobster. But from a kid's perspective, it's not knowledge that separates kids and adults. After all, many folks know kids or been the kid who hung out with the big kids or had a friend with cool parents or just stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to know yet. And that didn't make said kid or kids suddenly age into a decrepit doomer, did it? I don't think so. The worst we ever saw was a 14-year-old who had to hold down a job and had like a bunch of gray hair from stress. From a kid perspective, it can be a mystery at just what point you become an adult and your mentality changes. Apparently you become more responsible or something? It's kind of vague, but I think that empathy is something of a youthful superpower. See, you can be empathetic from experiencing pain and knowing from You can be empathetic from experiencing pain and knowing from relative experience, or you can just be, I don't know, good-natured? Seeing a hurt animal and wanting to help it despite not knowing anything about how it feels to be a bird, or if you even have the ability to help it, is a perfect example. That's why you'll commonly see stories where a roster full of adult characters is rounded out by one kid. The thought is, kids keep people wholesome? Moral?
You guys really aren't from Crawford, are you? Anything to stay alive. Stop the dead getting in. I try to avoid them.
Why?
Let's just say they have a zero-tolerance policy for anyone who won't or can't live by their rules.
So how'd you know we weren't them?
Because there are no children in Crawford. Not anymore.
Not murdery. Especially in RPGs. It's as common as trope as the Beast character. Shucks, sometimes even the same character. When you're growing up and folks are still encouraging you to play nice, you might remember the importance of sharing. Sharing is good. You might get a lecture if you're stingy. Giving something to those who don't have any is important. So important that gloating or reminding those who don't have that they don't have can be a no-no too. If you bring cupcakes for your friends, you better bring enough for the whole class, okay? And although some, even at an early age, might scoff at the idea of it being the responsibility of those with a lot of cool stuff to share with people who don't have as much cool stuff, we try to make a habit of being friends with folks who do think like that. But the harder you think about it, it just kind of makes it feel like it's baby's first communism. But the weird thing about once you're out of preschool is that over time, the sharing is less and less important. But there's no shortage of rules to replace it for sure. Look both ways when you cross the street. Don't stare. Eat your veggies. Don't curse. Respect adults. Only speak like this. Don't be overly dramatic about your problems. Lower your voice. You have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. Sit still. If someone offers you drugs, say no. You hit them back, so you're in the wrong now. You're getting too old for toys. You need to come out of your room more. Don't give money to the homeless, they'll just waste it on drugs. You're not taking drugs from homeless people, are you? My house, my rules. Don't make your problems other people's problems. Don't walk away from me. You need to start thinking seriously about your future. Being an adult is like a job. There are things you're supposed to do and ways you're supposed to do it, but once you actually start trying to do it, you find out that there are contradictions to what you were led to believe. In fact, there's no way you can do the job how you were told to. Not unless you have some inherent advantage, and if that's the case, that's already a contradiction of how you were supposed to become a good adult in the first place. Empathy is a luxury reserved for children and those who have the privilege to have never really grown up. What happened to being kind to everyone and helping people? The golden rule? If I was supposed to bring cupcakes for everybody, why do people not get to eat every night? Or not get help when they get sick when someone or when someone hurts them? The truth is, you don't have to be kind when you're an adult. In fact, it's not even that expected. All you have to do is be nice. And there's definitely a difference between niceness and kindness. With niceness, it's more of the appearance of civility and politeness. And that's supposed to be valuable.
Here's a little word of advice, nerd. Don't even think of applying, or else.
In fact, if you're mad at being mistreated, in many cases, it's rude to advocate for yourself. You need to think about what the other person's feeling for being called out for the bigotry, or for systematic kerfluffles. If it causes a fuss or an inconvenience to others, then it's bad, especially if those inconveniences are in power or would like to not think about the power they have. In fact, being inconvenienced and asking for a piggy to remove the human-shaped inconvenience, even if it kills said inconvenience, is common enough it has a name. And it's kind of like a personality. Basically a Karendere. Kindness and empathy are very much the bedrock of anti-capitalist action, and so it should come as no surprise that those on the right overwhelmingly frame leftism as impossible and childish. Not only against the grain of the way the world works, but something of a fantasy. Something so outrageous that to actually believe it earnestly makes you naive. You know the term associated with innocence, but being naive is a term associated with innocence, but it definitely has sort of a negative connotation, especially when it's applied to someone who is an adult. It's no surprise then that countercultural movements and massive political upheavals are pushed by young people. Some say it's just a youthful fervor, that burning hot passion of youth. But what if it's something less vague and romantic? What if it's something that you aren't necessarily barred from once you reach a certain age? What if it's just the rejection of what we've been conditioned to think? What if the reason the older you get, the more it's believed you're gonna be okay with the status quo is because you've just been indoctrinated for longer? What if you could resist it like you used to? Well, just become a baby and erase all the capitalist programming. Don't worry. Potty training is a small price to pay for evolution. Being a baby for a leftist is something we thought once upon a time couldn't cross streams, or at least wasn't worth it to try. But the continued growth of this channel seems to prove otherwise, and it's definitely comforted us as someone who can't really ignore how It's definitely comforted us as someone who can't really ignore how intersectionality blankets our entire existence. And we've talked to many an age player who feels seen by our work. Folks who've told us that their way of life has been held in contempt by other leftists, that they've felt invalidated for their interests or their kinks, even in kink-positive spaces, or even makes them dangerous. At best, it seems the most charitable response to being an open age player in a lefty space is that you'll be told it's inappropriate to talk about. But with the openness of kink in leftist spaces, especially with the need for pro-kink and pro-sex worker solidarity, it feels kind of off. It's less so it's not okay for you to talk about and more, I'm uncomfortable with it, so I'd like you to never bring it up again. People talk about how not safe for work spaces are diminishing online, but there are spaces for people who make age play related content, especially those who live off of it, who have already had that sort of content banned from their sites. OnlyFans hasn't allowed H-play content on their platform for months now. And certain sex workers and kink rights activists are definitely ignored because of being affiliated with H-play. Not to mention all the, for example, furry artists in the H-play community who have to hide that they even draw that type of stuff to even get work or commissions. Or give it up entirely because people found out and now they can't get any work other than H-play related work. Hey Drizzle, get the heck out of my essay. This is mine. You have yours. That one's for February 14th. Hey, I'm going. Try not to shit yourself. Continuing. There are age-playing sex workers, for example. But beyond the most surface perspectives one might glean, I think the pursuit of a youthful mindset might be valuable to leftists. Not to say some, especially the gamers among them, aren't already flirting with it.
Generally speaking, games will leverage more content against no content, and I'm a big stupid gamer baby. I want the content. Give me the content. I'm a big baby. Wah!
Hello there. Google, yes. Activision did a no, yes he did.
I pissed my pants.
Someone in our Discord server was talking about this the other day, and it directly inspired this video. That the disillusionment that teenagers are categorized as having with authority, and which adult society expects one to grow out of, is a result of being raised to believe the world is one way, only to realize that they were being lied to the whole time. It's justifiable for one to be pissed in that scenario. You were told that you could be anything, anyone, that you could achieve your dreams, but it seems like they told you that just so you would keep on going and wouldn't revolt. And so you have so much told to you about how the world works at this point, and not being given a lot of options for alternatives that even if you don't like it, you know you gotta do it. As you grow up, rules become more and more arbitrary, requirements for advancement in school more contrived, and busy work becomes even more blatantly a waste of time. And all these things are just to train you to be a good employee once you're an adult, or even for some folks before that, as there are a great many who didn't get to really live out their entire childhood because they had to help take care of their families, or themselves. Many folks see being young as a time when one is generally distrustful and resistant to rules, but what if it's not so much a sign of reaching a quote-unquote rebellious stage, but rather the horse resisting to being broken? What if adults keep kids away from the coal mine of capitalism, aka the real world, because they are the canaries? Not to say young people are the only canaries. Pretty much any marginalized person pretty much any marginalized person is. We can discuss how children are marginalized at some other point, but I don't think it's a hot take to say actual children don't have rights. Our Discord member actually put it a lot better than I could ever put it.
The phrase, "you need to face reality," is the propaganda of downtrodden guardians who at one point we thought we could trust. I think it's all misdirection. They claim reality is cruel, get used to it, when they mean we've been broken down by capitalism, which has become our reality. You must accept what we have accepted.
And that's hecking terrifying. It's not that you need an age player in the room to come to these conclusions. Those who recognize the way school trains you to respect and accept capitalism's tenets and be a good little proletariat, or whom recognize the ways overall in which indoctrination to capitalism happens slowly, are in good company in that regard. But this particular perspective, and something that is generally written off as the fault of young people, is something we think is something worth remembering. Because even recognizing that something is bad doesn't mean we unlearn our implicit acceptance of it. Like how despite knowing their value as a human being isn't determined by productivity, someone might still find themselves feeling guilty if they don't feed the urge to feed energy into the maw of capitalism. Sorry, if they aren't productive. And to be honest, you don't have to be a leftist to sniff out what adults are supposed to be and are propagandized on lies and misdirection in order to ignore the plights of their fellow person. Sometimes it feels like adulthood means ignoring class struggle. In fact, it's part of Tyler Durden's soliloquy in Fight Club about why they should be angry about the system. An entire generation pumping gas, waiting tables, slaves with white collars. Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need. We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. There's no Great War, no Great Depression. Our Great War is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression is our lives. We've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'll all be millionaires and movie gods, rock stars and VTubers. But we won't. And we're slowly learning that fact. And we're very, very pissed off. The reputation of those who look at the message of Fight Club and thought it only applied to men and glorified the toxic masculinity it warned against tend to be folks who respond better to the cult mentality of MGTOW and the alt-right. But aren't those groups really good at telling partial truths? Basically outlining a symptom but misdiagnosing the cause. The funny thing is that what many millennials and zoomers have now grown up framed as is inconsistent with reality, expecting the world to be nicer than it is, of being naive and denying the nature of people. People can't share? What are you, 5? Anything you ever get is by standing on someone else's back. Anyone who believes that humans are inherently good and by dismantling hierarchy and giving folks access to human rights such as food, shelter, and medical care, internet, and a planet that isn't going to kill us are all infantilized. Infantilized by those in power as being not wise enough to know how the world really works. Why, if we didn't have these structures, the world would descend into madness, don't you know? But you don't know, you're just a child. You wouldn't understand the way the world works. And that's why you're not allowed power, because you would just misuse it. They tell you to grow up and get rid of your pipe dreams, get a job, get a family, grab your bootstraps. They teach you Lord of the Flies in school and never mention how when something like that happened in real life, all the boys were actually there for each other.
After years of investigation to track down verified real-world equivalent stories, Bregman found one. In 1965, 6 Tongan teenagers found themselves trapped on a remote, uninhabited island for over 15 months before their eventual rescue. As with the Blizzard story, the reality differs tremendously from the fantasy. The boys worked together and by their time of rescue had established an admittedly basic but reliable commune, with a food garden, pens for livestock, and reliable means of gathering rainwater. At one point, one of the boys had even broken their leg while scouting the land, and where these Hobbesian tales might have us imagining the boys deciding to abandon their friend and drop the dead weight, instead he was cared for until the group's eventual rescue.
They say kids are cruel, but we don't think that. We think cruelty and coldness are taught. That personal responsibility in seeing yourself as an island in a vast ocean of other islands is something that is framed against all our better interests. I think that unlearning these things takes time. Maybe the rest of our lives. But I think trying to return to a headspace that can believe that change is possible is important to reminding ourselves and each other that there was a time that we didn't know what capitalism was, and that being convinced it will never go away was a long process that was hard-fought to be maintained throughout all of our lives. I know this take doesn't really add to praxis, but I think it's valuable to those comrades who, like us, fall into doomery mentalities. And of course, those who see folks like us trying to make room in the leftist sphere as annoying or invalid. And of course, those who want to better understand why someone would want to be a leftist but also be open about stuff like this. In fact, for as long as we can remember, something that we've always sought to maintain about ourselves was that we didn't want to become an adult, but not so much we didn't want to physically become an adult, although that too. But we didn't want to become bitter like one. Adults seem so angry, so sad. I never wanted to be like that. And even though that didn't have to do with politics for us for a while, I think that the bitterness we want to avoid is that coldness, that acceptance that the world won't change. And that leaning into that selfishness and self-preservation that capitalism implicitly encourages is a game over. And I hope that one day that coldness, that self-interest, isn't synonymous with the idea of adulthood. I like the idea of being an adult and being a baby. Hey everybody, it's me, Punkbite. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Infanta did all the writing and voicing, other than me and Drizzle's cameos. But I did the editing, but that was it. There's a full Infanta essay. So thanks for giving that time of day. Anyway, this came instead of the Diminish video essay we were working on, which we are still working on, but we wanted to get at least one essay out before January was over, so it kind of just came down to that. So in terms of the future, we are hopefully going to be finishing the Diminish essay in the next couple days, and we're actually planning to release the Omori video on the 18th. We're not done with our second playthrough of it yet, so you can check that out on Twitch, hopefully on Tuesday. We're gonna do like a 12-hour stream and see if we can finish it. And then after that, we're taking a break from streaming for a little bit to work on essay stuff. And our mental health, I guess. Thank you everyone who supports us, including our wonderful patrons, Joystick, Tenlufu, Sammy, Valued Customer, and I'm a Dumb Baby. See you soon, everybody, and take care of yourselves.